Hello everyone, Lytro Storm here, and today I've got a brand new what if for Telltale's The Walking Dead. At the end of the first episode, you're faced with your biggest and most iconic classic choice in the game. Who do you save between two people? Sure, you chose between Sean and Duck earlier, but no matter what, Sean dies and Duck lives. But Carley and Doug is a different story. The two go on to live until episode 3, with some unique plotlines being thrown into the mix as well. But what if you didn't have to choose? What if Carley and Doug both survived the first episode? This one was highly requested, and we even got a member suggestion from Raven saying he wanted what if Carley survives. So I figured I'd do him one better since I already had this coming up, and we'll do what if Carley and Doug both survived. But before I do want to make it abundantly clear that saving these two from the initial death in episode 1 does not guarantee their survival throughout the entire series. I want to keep these videos as realistic as possible since I'm wanting to tell you what would happen first and foremost. It's a what if. So now that we've gotten that out of the way and you know that Carley and Doug could potentially die later, let's continue on. In order to make this work, we're going to slightly change the timing of the final choice for episode 1. Carley gets grabbed by the walkers, but Doug hasn't been grabbed yet. This allows Lee to give Carley the ammo, and then Doug gets grabbed, but luckily for him, Lee saves him. After they all leave and make it to the motor inn, Lee sees Carley and Doug talk briefly before hugging. He approaches them separately, and they talk about how they nearly died, thanking him for saving them. On top of that, they talk to Lee about their feelings for the other and ask for advice on how to proceed. Lee can either respond to this by telling them to go for it or to be careful. It's a new world and you never know what kind of issues a relationship might pose. No matter what, Carley and Doug still end up together by episode 2, as it's very unlikely Carley wouldn't just flirt with Doug anyway. The way she treats Lee in episodes 2 and 3 show that she's clearly very headstrong and shows her attraction very clearly. But with Lee, she had to get over Doug and develop it, whereas with Doug, she already liked him, so it makes sense why they'd be together earlier. And if Carley flirts with Doug, there's no way he's not caving immediately. It's Doug. However, this choice matters a little bit later, and maybe there's a line of dialogue from Doug and Carley about Lee's advice. Like if he said to be careful, they'd say, "I know what you said, but..." Or just thank him for his support if he was supportive. When it comes time to feed everyone, Carley refuses food, telling Lee to give it to Doug first. Doug also refuses, but after hearing that Carley wanted him to eat, he chooses to take the food. But once the St. John's proposition the group to check out their dairy, Carley goes with Lee, Kenny, Mark, and Ben, since she can defend herself pretty well. After the whole bandit attack happens and Mark is shot, the rest of the group shows up, with the exception of Carley and Doug. Ben can either stay at the motor inn or not, it doesn't really affect anything. The point is that our couple is getting their alone time. In the fight with Andy, Carley and Doug would return, with Carley aiming her gun to help Lee, but Doug tells her to wait, and instead uses his laser pointer to distract Andy. And if Lily doesn't shoot a rifle later on, then Carley will fire in her place. And that's pretty much a wrap for episode 2. In episode 3, there'd be no Carley/Lee romance for obvious reasons. Carley and Doug both being there would help kill the bandits and walkers easier, so the walker that bit Duck originally won't now. After leaving the motel, Carley defends Ben from Lily's accusation, and Doug defends her as well, which gives the wrong message as they're together, so they might have conspired together too. Carley tells off Lily, resulting in Lily trying to shoot her like she does in the canon events, but Doug pushes her out of the way and dies instead, like he does in his path. Now I know what you're thinking, isn't this what if Carley and Doug survived? And the answer is yes, but I did say at the beginning of the video that surviving their initial death event doesn't mean that they get permanent plot armor for all 4 seasons. Lily's anger would still build up, resulting in her shooting someone. Carley didn't dodge canonically, so there's no reason to believe she would here, and Doug got shot saving Ben, so there's no reason to believe he wouldn't if it was Carley. Plus, the changes made up to this point are already pretty big. Even now, Carley will live on to the foreseeable future, and so will others now that Duck isn't bitten. Maybe in the future I'll cover both of them staying alive to the end, but back to the story. Lee disarms Lily as Carley runs to Doug's body, crying his name. After Kenny, Lee, and Lily briefly trade words, Carley pulls her gun and aims it at Lily, preparing to shoot her as she yells at her. Kenny tells her not to do it as they don't need any more killing tonight. Carley's anger fades away, and she lowers her gun, getting into the RV. I don't see her being the type of person to just gun someone down like that, even if they did something horrible. Lee chooses to kick or keep Lily, but if he keeps her, Ben will have to watch her, since it's not good for Carley to do that. The group eventually comes across the train where Lee can talk to everyone. He checks up on Carley, and if you kept Lily, she'd wonder why he kept her around and mention that having Ben watch her instead of her was a good idea. She didn't kill her back then, but if she's faced with the opportunity for hours, she's not sure if she'll slip. Chuck joins the group, and they get the train working with Lily stealing the RV if you kept her around. Since Duck isn't bitten, a few changes occur, and they're pretty massive. For one, Chuck wouldn't have the reason to scare Clem about her death like he did. Instead, he would end up talking to Lee and suggesting he help her become more capable. The train also never stops, since they don't have to put Duck down, so they arrive at the bridge a lot sooner. Katja and Duck are also both alive now, which is awesome. And since they arrive at the bridge sooner, they wouldn't meet Omid and Krista, at least not as quickly, but the two do show up at some point while they are stuck there, so they'd still end up meeting the group and joining them. From there, they head to Savannah, and Lee and Kenny hear the stranger talking to Clem on the radio. After arriving, the group gets swarmed by walkers in the streets of Savannah, and while having Carley there definitely helps to secure the group, you have to keep in mind that the group is also now bigger as well. Because Katja and Duck are both here, they'd be Kenny's sole focus, and with him tripping and Cannon already having issues with himself, I don't think his attention's gonna be perfectly divided amongst everyone. So Carley is pretty much taking his role in terms of defending people. And because things are evened out, that means that Chuck still sacrifices himself to save Clem and gets left behind. The group makes it to a house, securing all of the supplies and finding a young walker in the attic. It doesn't have as much significance as in Cannon though, since Duck is alive, but Kenny might see it as what could happen to Duck. Kenny and Lee leave to go find a boat, but Carley goes with since she doesn't want to just sit around thinking about what has happened. She wants to do something to keep her mind off of Doug. But due to Katja helping keep an eye on Clementine, I doubt she would be able to sneak off, so she wouldn't be there when Molly shows up. This means Molly has no reason not to kill Lee if he loses against her. However, Carley and her gun are both present now, so she'd aim it at Molly to beg her back off. From there, Molly reveals herself to be a girl and begins questioning if they're from Crawford, which prompts her to tell them what she knows about it. Since Kenny isn't on edge due to his family being alive and the fact that Molly has had a gun on her for longer, there's no need for him to jump up and shoot her from behind. This means Kenny doesn't fire a shot, which attracted walkers and Cannon. Here, Molly and our trio just trade information before Molly wishes them luck and leaves. They were unable to find a good boat, and with Molly saying Savannah was basically picked clean, it's not looking good. That is, until they return to the house to find Duck excitedly telling his father to come see what he and Clementine found. They follow and see a boat in the shed, which gets everyone hyped. After a look, Kenny notes that they need a battery and fuel, and Krista says Omid's injury is just getting worse. Seeing this, Kenny suggests they try and find Molly the next day and get her to help get supplies from Crawford. Katja brings up the fact that Chuck is still out there as well, and Kenny replies that they can look for him at the same time too. The morning arrives and Lee and Kenny venture out, waiting to hear some bells ringing to find Molly. Lee questions why Kenny thinks she'd want to help them, and he replies that he's not sure, but it's their only shot at maybe finding the stuff they need for the boat. As Lee, you can then say that he left out the fact that they need supplies for Omid's leg, or that they're supposed to be looking for Chuck too, but Kenny brushes it off, saying, yeah, that too. Here, he's really only thinking about his own family, which is perfectly in his character. At some point, they'd hear the bells and would follow carefully to find Molly. They manage to track her down, asking for help, with Molly asking what exactly is in it for her, to which Kenny replies that he can get her a spot on the boat. She was mentioning how much of a dump this place is, so getting out is probably a good idea. Molly doesn't seem to think this is enough, but her expression changes after a second, and she accepts this. Lee and Kenny are both surprised, and it hints that maybe Molly has some things hidden. They take Molly back to the house, and she helps them plan things out. She says she knows the entrance because she's scouted out Crawford before. This is a very risky plan though, as the people there won't like intruders at all. But at this point, it's our group's only hope. Molly, Lee, Kenny, Krista, Carley, and Ben are all going, with Clementine being a choice for Lee. But leaving her home is more of a reasonable choice this time, since Katja and Duck are there. So she'd at least have more company than a sick and dying Omid. And if he did turn, maybe Katja could deal with the walker. Anyway, our group makes an attempt to sneak past some Crawford guards at night, only to find out that they're walkers. They make it inside, quickly seeing the place was overrun, which actually makes things easier for them. They don't have Vernon or Bree to guide them, but Molly knew where the meds would be, and if you don't ask about the battery, Lee will suggest the auto shop himself. So that crosses those two off the list, leaving just the fuel. They wouldn't have an exact idea, but Molly might know it'd be in a maintenance shed, or at least have a hunch. And if it's not like there's many places that scream fuel on the map, so it would probably be the first place they choose to look anyway. Without Bree, Kenny would have to go to the maintenance shed with Carley instead, which might be a bit slower since Bree knew stuff about Crawford and Carley does not. Krista goes to the nurse's office alone, but it's also theoretically the least risky job since it's in the same building they're already in. Due to Kenny and Carley taking a bit longer, Lee would just try and help Krista get the nurse's door open since both she and Vernon struggled. Eventually, Kenny and Carley show up, yelling for help, so Lee runs over to barricade the door from walkers. After that, Lee takes out the walkers in the hallway and helps Krista crack the code on the medical supplies. An interesting note with Ben would be that his guilt has been entirely swapped from Kenny to Carley. Kenny's whole family is okay, whereas Carley was framed in his place and Doug died because of it. So after getting everything they need and getting chased by walkers, Ben starts to confess to Carley what he did, and she becomes furious. After she defended him, after Doug defended him, and he died because he didn't speak up, they almost died because he made that deal. She's mad, but Kenny wants to focus on getting out of there right now, which is in stark contrast to Cannon, where he decides Ben is the bigger issue. But that's just the type of guy Kenny is. It was his family on the line before, and now it's not. She continues on, but Kenny uses that as the time to drop the bomb that the boat has limited capacity, so chances are with this revelation, Ben is gonna get left behind. He asks if that settles things, or if they just want to sit around waiting for walkers to break in. The others just stay silent and proceed to follow Kenny through the armory door as walkers start trailing them. Ben gets grabbed by the bell tower walker, and Lee is forced to either pull him up or drop him, with Carley briefly looking back to see what's going on. Either way, Lee makes it out of there and they return home. Katja and Duck are happy to see Kenny and Clementine back, but Molly and Ben are both determinate on whether they're there now. Omid gets some medical care from Katja since she was a vet, and also basically the group's medic, so I think he'd survive the infection now that they've got the supplies. If you didn't leave or shoot Molly, then she would just leave the group like she did in the original story. Clementine asks Lee if they'll be able to find her parents, and regardless of his answer, she knows the truth and cries herself to sleep. Lee then drifts off himself, waking up to find Clementine gone. He checks outside, finding her hat and being bitten on the wrist by a walker before killing it. After this, everyone pours out of the house to see what the commotion was, and Lee tells them Clementine is gone. But without Vernon, their only leads are the stranger on the radio and the Marsh House, where Clem's parents were staying. This then becomes the obvious choice on where to look, even if it's a long shot. This is where Lee rallies the group to go with him, where some things are altered. Omid and Krista basically stay the same, only going with you if you revealed the bite or left Clementine at the house. Kenny will now join you regardless of Ben being there, since he doesn't really care about what he did, as it didn't affect him much. In fact, it just led to a psycho leaving the group. So as long as you have a good relationship with him, he'll go. Unless Molly and Ben didn't return from Crawford. This is because Katja wouldn't want Kenny putting his life at risk so much, so she'd convince him to stay with her, Duck, and the boat. As for Carley, she'd have her own friendship meter. The following determine whether she'll go with Lee. Telling Clementine your secret in episode 1, encouraging her to be with Doug in episode 1, giving Doug food in episode 2, revealing you're a murderer in episode 3, leaving Lily behind in episode 3, pulling Ben up in episode 4, and revealing your bite in episode 4. If you've managed to do 4 of these 7 things, Carley will join you on your quest to find Clementine. I know it might be weird to say that she'd want you to pull Ben up, but I think her anger would subside, and she'd feel super guilty about wanting Ben dead. She just seems like that kind of person. At least with Lily, she straight up shot Doug. Ben never intended for any of that to happen, and he's still a kid. Ben will try to join Lee no matter what, but it's his choice since he might consider him a liability or not want to stir things up with Carley if she's coming too. Although she is okay with Ben coming with, since they're trying to save Clementine together. And so Lee and his Chex Mix of a team head off to find Clementine, while the others stay behind. After a while of walking and fighting off walkers, Lee ends up passing out, which reveals the bite if he didn't already. They get him inside a building to avoid him dying, or if it's just Lee, he snuck past more walkers since it's easier alone. This means he's less drained, so he hides in a building before passing out. Some time passes and Lee awakens, and the group continues on. If there's more than one person with you, then someone from your group will go to ring a bell in order to keep the walkers away in case you pass out again. If not, you just keep going toward the Marsh House, with Lee telling the others to stay back as they all have lives ahead of them. From here, Lee goes on to battle it out against the Horde, finding his way inside in hopes of finding Clementine. Luckily for him, he meets the stranger, and things go exactly the way they do canonically. Sadly, Lee does die in the same way too, and Clem goes back to the house after being found by whoever went with Lee, if anyone did. The issue of the boat still presents itself though, as Kenny said it wouldn't fit more than 5 people, even if one of them was a kid. And here we've got 7 or 8, counting Ben. Kenny is still dead set on leaving with his family on the boat, but obviously he can't fit everyone else on. He wants to take Clementine with them since she's a kid, and she's Duck's friend, but trouble arises when Krista, Omid, Carley, and Ben realize only one more person can fit if Clem goes. If Ben is there, they'd basically pass the spot up to him since he's a young guy, and Kenny doesn't hate him. He just doesn't particularly like him either. Oh yeah, and if Ben isn't there, Carly wouldn't want to leave Omid and Krista behind alone, and vice versa. That pretty much means that Krista, Omid, and Carly are out of luck, and this is where your first choice as Clem comes in. The day Kenny and his family leave, she can make the choice to go on the boat or refuse staying with Omid, Krista, and Carly. And with that, Kenny, Katja, Duck, and potentially Ben and Clementine wave goodbye to their friends as they sail off, leaving the rest behind. After the events of Season 1, Clementine is left with either Krista, Omid, and Carly, or Kenny, Katja, and Duck, with potentially Ben joining them on the boat. So Season 2's intros would change depending on which one your Clementine had. In the first one, Carly would likely be keeping watch outside the bathroom, or would be in the women's room with Clem. Either way, this would prevent Michelle from killing Omid. First of all, she might not even show up since Carly is either there guarding or just an additional person Michelle would have seen enter the bathroom. It's a lot easier to jump a little kid than an armed adult and a little kid. And if she did show up, she'd either try and jump Carly and fail, resulting in Carly being forced to shoot her, or she'd play nice and try to join the group. In the second version, she'd be able to join but would end up stealing from them at night, and probably shoot Omid after he sees her. In my opinion, I see this as what would happen, as I doubt she's that stupid to try and fight a woman with a gun. But it would be a cool moment for Carly, as she'd have to kill someone for the first time. Sadly, I don't see any choice Clementine could make that would change this. It's not like she knew Michelle, so it'd just be whichever ones the writers choose. And since I'm the writer, we're gonna go with the one where she stays with the group, steals from them, Omid dies, and then Krista probably shoots her, or she escapes. Going forward, we'd reach the same point where Clem and Krista are in the woods, but now Carly is there too. Krista wouldn't really blame Clementine for Omid's death, since she had nothing to do with it, but she is still heavily wounded by what happened. Also, Carly being there definitely doesn't change the odds of Krista's baby being born that much, so I'm gonna say she still loses it. Carly definitely relates to Krista's loss, as it's a very similar situation to her own with Doug, but Krista also losing the baby is the final nail that just keeps her distant. And so she leaves to find more wood while Carly stays with Clementine to get a fire going. The two talk briefly, but it's cut short when they hear some voices in the distance. They see Krista being surrounded after investigating, and Carly wants to help her, but she doesn't have any ammo due to the harsh life she'd been living. However, she's kept a souvenir from Doug, the laser pointer. She tells Clementine to leave just in case things go bad, but Clementine can choose whether or not to go. Carly uses the laser pointer to blind one of the dudes, and Clem throws a rock at another one if she's there. After that, Carly books it, but if Clem was there too, we don't hear Krista getting hit, so maybe she survives. Anyway, Carly eventually gets separated from Clementine during the chase. Clem either already left, or Carly defends Clem from their assailant. Clem then gets attacked by walkers, causing her to fall down the river and float downstream. Now in the other timeline, Clem is on the boat with Kenny's family and maybe Ben, but some tragedy occurs, whether that be walkers attacking the boat, or maybe this is after they left the boat since it's not going to last forever. The point is, if Ben is there, he gets killed, as if we kept him around, he'd change too much of the story for me to keep up with two branching paths of the whole season. And let's face it, Telltale would probably not put a guy who can survive Season 1 into its Season 2 cast. It'd just be too much work when they could simply just kill him off before the time skip. Don't believe me? Look at Season 3's endings. And remember that the Clementine comic takes place away from the school so that they don't have to show us the characters who may have survived. Anyway, this event causes Clementine to be separated from Kenny and his family, and despite their efforts, they wouldn't be able to find her. She ends up out on her own until she eventually ends up finding a dog in the forest. This would be our connecting point from the two timelines. And yes, it's very unlikely that she'd end up in the same spot she did canonically, despite being on a boat for a long time and going somewhere completely different, but we need the story to continue, so suspend your disbelief a little. The dog turns feral, biting her on the arm, and she runs around the forest until she's met by Pete and Luke. From here, pretty much everything plays out the same way it did in canon, up until episode 2, where Clementine reunites with Kenny. But this time, it isn't just him. Katja and Duck are there too. This is very interesting, as it means Sarita is just a part of the group now. She's a friend Kenny and his family met at some point along the road. Clem and Duck reuniting would be awesome, as both have been good friends up until their point of separation. It seems like everything is falling into place, and things are going right. And the most important change is that Duck is there to actually pass Kenny that can.
Pass me that can, Duck.
Eventually, the wind turbine goes out, causing the group to scramble together a plan on what to do. Now, originally, Sarita wanted to go check on the transformer, but Kenny refused the request in order to protect her. However, since he's not in a relationship with her and has been willing to enlist the help from women he's not with before, such as Carley and Bree, I think he'd allow her to come with. The rest of the group battles the walkers, with Katja and Duck mostly staying out of it, since they've just not had much experience fighting yet. Kenny kept them safe on the boat, and after that, they met Sarita and eventually Walter and Matthew. This means that since we lost one person defending the group from walkers, Sarita, Walter's decision of saving Nick doesn't really matter. Someone is likely to die, and in canon, Nick came the closest, since he literally can in the game. So I'm just gonna say that he dies either way, even if Walter tries to save him. Anyway, Carver's group arrives, gunning down the walkers and holding our gang hostage. Katja and Duck are upstairs with Alvin and Rebecca since they stayed inside the whole time. They discuss the fact that Kenny, Luke, and Sarita are still out there, and that Carver doesn't know about Katja and Duck yet. So the two of them can leave and go find the others. Clementine can then choose to go with them, or go downstairs to prevent further harm to Carlos. Kenny and Sarita are quickly found by Katja, Duck, and potentially Clementine, who join them at their scouting points. The two are aiming guns and choose to both fire. Kenny's shot hits the same guy it did canonically, killing him, while Sarita hits Troy non-fatally. Carver gets angry at the attack and swiftly guns down Walter and shoots Carlos in the hand, matching the death and injury. He then offers them to surrender, which they all have different feelings about. Kenny is outraged about Walter's death and the fact that this Carver dude just took us home. But his family and the rest of his group is out here with him. He doesn't know any of the others. He suggests they just escape, but both Sarita and Katja are against this, as they don't think it's right to let these innocent people be taken. Clem picks a side, but Kenny reluctantly gives in and agrees to continue shooting. Kenny fires another shot that hits Carver in the shoulder, while Sarita misses her next shot. This means Alvin is gunned down next, unless Clementine is there and saves him, which leads to Kenny turning himself in. But he tells Sarita and his family to escape, as he sadly says goodbye to Duck. Now, if Clementine isn't there to save him, Kenny would likely just continue firing, but I'll say Sarita is out of ammo now just to keep things simple. Kenny attempts another shot, and Clem can choose to grab the gun or let him shoot. This time, his shot just misses, as all of Carver's group is now on high alert and are going for cover. So now we have to determine what Carver would do next. He's got the choice of Carlos, Rebecca, and Sarah as who he should pick to hold at gunpoint. The most logical option here is Sarah, as she's a child, so Kenny would probably stop or be convinced to by Katja and Sarita. He would then turn himself in, but Clem would have to go as well since Carver knows she's with the group. Plus, there were two shooters. I'm sure they wouldn't want Clem to go, but they know that they're way more likely to be chased down if Clem runs off with them. This is the best option. Kenny says goodbye to his family, and he and Clem enter the lodge while Sarita, Katja, and Duck escape. After that, just about everything in the first half of episode 3 happens the same. The only difference is being that Nick is dead in all versions, and there's no Sarita because she's with Katja and Duck. When Luke grabs Clementine, he tells her that he met up with Sarita and Kenny's family, and that they're heading to Parker's Run, which is a nearby location that his group knows about. The plan with the radios happens, Luke is captured, and Kenny is beaten down. After that, our group takes down Carver with the help of Bonnie, Mike, and Jane, and escapes inside the herd. But we have a change here. Our group is actually smaller now since Sarita is away, so we've got two possible options. Nobody else dies, or we choose a different person. Carlos is still getting shot for sure, but that leaves us with Clem, Kenny, Luke, Sarah, Rebecca, Mike, Jane, and Bonnie. Sarah is out of the picture due to her running off. Rebecca, Kenny, Luke, and Mike were all not present until after Sarita got bit, so our options are cut down to Jane, Bonnie, and Clementine. And honestly, out of all these three, it's clear who's drawing the most attention. Bonnie. She's firing her gun repeatedly, which should draw most walkers aggroed onto Sarita toward her. Her gun is able to defend pretty well, but as soon as she needs to reload, it's over, and she's bitten on the wrist. Clementine can choose to cut her hand off or kill the walker. If you cut her hand off, she gets eaten by the walkers, but if you don't, then she continues on with the bite. Pretty much the exact same as Sarita. She ends up making it to Parker's Run, but I don't see her surviving the bite here. Kenny knew Sarita was bitten canonically and didn't try cutting her arm off, which he definitely would have tried if he thought it was possible to save her. So that leaves us with the conclusion that it was probably too late, and if it's too late for Sarita, it's most likely too late for Bonnie. Very unfortunate, but that's the way it is. Since Kenny isn't distracted by Sarita dying / being dead, he takes charge on what they should do. Sarita and Mike agree to start scouting, while Kenny's family stays with Bonnie and Rebecca. Clementine and Jane leave to go find Luke and Sarah, which goes the same as it did canonically. By the time they arrive, Bonnie has been put down by Kenny if she was there, which is sad news for Luke. The history exhibit was already looked at by Mike and Sarita, so now all that's left is the observation deck. Clementine and Jane check that out, where they find Arvo, and all that goes the same too. The only difference is that Luke going with Jane doesn't screw the group, since Sarita would be keeping watch. This means they're able to detect the walkers sooner and escape to the observation deck. Some walkers follow, but not as many, leading to Sarah surviving and Rebecca's baby being born with the help of Katja and Kenny. The group then argues over staying or leaving sooner, but by that point, Jane has already left. It is considerably less hostile between Kenny and Luke, since, like I said, Luke didn't really do much wrong. Eventually, our gang leaves and are attacked by Arvo's group. Rebecca turns and is put down by either Kenny or Clementine, starting the gunfight. Now in canon, our group consisted of 5 people: Clementine, Kenny, Luke, Mike, and Bonnie. But now Bonnie is gone, leaving the other 4 plus Sarita, Katja, Duck, and potentially Sarah. That's 7 or 8 people in a close-up gunfight, so it's more likely for someone to die during this. Now Sarita is essentially taking Bonnie's place, so I don't see her dying here, as Bonnie didn't die in canon, and that leaves Katja, Duck, and Sarah if she's there. Katja would obviously be defending the kids, so I think she's the most likely candidate to die, which would be very sad. But we've held off Kenny's grief for 2 seasons now, with Katja not dying in season 1 and Sarita not dying in season 2, so I guess we're gonna have Katja die here. Kenny and Duck would both be broken over this, with Kenny grabbing Arvo as a shield. Luckily, Jane kills the last enemy before it comes to Arvo being shot, ending the battle. Kenny then runs over to his wife to see her bleeding out, and trying everything he can to keep her alive, but to no avail. Sarita and the others attempt to comfort her and Duck, but he ignores them, or blows up at them if they didn't listen to him about leaving immediately. He beats up Arvo, which the group tries to stop, especially Sarita, who's the closest to him. Meanwhile, Duck is just crying the whole time, not knowing how to process what's going on with his mother dying and his father going insane. Arvo tells them about the house that he knows about, so they head in that direction. They end up stopping at a power plant, and Clementine has to get Kenny and Duck to rejoin the group at the fire. It'd just be some comforting dialogue telling them you're here for them. Sarah will still be silent no matter what, as she's still shaken over everything that happened. Katja did just die for her, basically. The next day, they continue their trek toward the house and have a long walk along the frozen lake. Luke gets stuck, but since Sarita would have been with Duck after Kenny chases Arvo down, it means only Clementine and potentially Sarah are there. But Sarah wouldn't really know what to do, leaving it up to Clementine to either try and cover Luke or help him. Either way, it fails, and Luke drowns, with Clem barely making it back up after she went in after him. And maybe you could even say that Sarah falls in like Bonnie did because she tries to help, and then you get to choose whether or not to break the ice and save Sarah. Kenny probably doesn't beat down on Arvo here, since he cares less about the rest of the group, and he still has a son. So Luke dying isn't a huge deal to him anyway. Jane finds the food Arvo told them about, and Clem takes a nap. Kenny then gets to work on the truck, and Sarita expresses her inability to picture Kenny going down a dark path. And after hearing what he did to Carver, she worries more for what he will become, and what could happen to Duck if he doesn't get his head straight. Clem talks to Duck as well, who is also concerned for his dad, but is still grieving heavily over his mother. Clem helps Kenny with the truck before going back in. Kenny eventually gets it working, and the group argues over where they're gonna go. Kenny's son being there definitely does add credibility of him choosing where to go, but the rest of the group isn't fond of the Wellington idea, besides Sarita and maybe Clementine. Kenny flips out in the truck, and Duck goes to talk to his dad, only to hear his rant in place of Clem. Later that night, Clementine wakes up to see Arvo and Mike attempting to leave the group. Mike tries to talk her down, but Arvo shoots her with a rifle, waking everyone up. They run out to see a bleeding Clementine, and immediately get in the truck to leave. With Sarita and Kenny both wanting to go to Wellington, Jane would be kind of outvoted, but Sarita is sympathetic of her idea of going back to House. It would be a good place to stop by and grab supplies. Kenny refuses to hear this though, and they eventually get stopped by the huge wall of cars. Kenny angrily exits the truck, telling Duck to stay back while he looks for some fuel. However, walkers show up, forcing the group to drive off. Jane would be the one driving since Clem was only a last resort. Jane knows how to drive, so she is able to avoid the walkers, making it to the rest stop. Kenny arrives shortly after, and they continue the argument over where to go. But with the harsh environment, Sarita wants to go to House for sure. Wellington can wait until after they're fully stocked up. Now Jane and Sarita are both against Kenny, with Duck blindly agreeing with his dad, while Clem chooses for herself. No matter what, Kenny is outvoted. So he opts to take Duck and AJ with him to find Wellington, but Sarita doesn't think it's a good idea. They should all stick together. Jane doesn't really care either way, and Clementine has 3 choices. She can agree to the split up but keep AJ, She can ask to leave with Kenny, or she can ask Kenny to come with them. These choices will determine the ending of the game. If you leave with Kenny and Duck, you end up at Wellington where he begs Edith to take the kids. But since they were barely willing to take Clem and AJ, Duck being there ruins things. He obviously prioritizes Duck over Clementine, but this is the moment where Duck finally makes his own choice. He doesn't want to leave his father. And so Clem can go in with AJ or leave with Kenny and Duck. Going with Sarita and Jane leads to them ending up at House where they either let in the family or not. Not doing it will please Jane but upset Sarita. It seems like on this path they've given up a lot of hope in humanity. Also, Sarah would be with them if you kept her alive to the end. And lastly, if you convinced Kenny to come with you to House, then you'd arrive and still let the family in or not, but Kenny overrides your choice and lets them in anyway. It's a husband, wife, and their son, just like his family. And it also kind of makes a note of how keeping Kenny with the group kind of destroys things a little bit, as they don't even get to choose for themselves. After the events of Season 2, Clementine was left with a few different endings, but they all end up with the same result, placing her right where she needs to be in Season 3. So let's go ahead and go through our 4 endings. The Wellington ending goes the exact same, as only Clem and AJ could be accepted, which is the same scenario as in canon. The Kenny ending adds Duck, which pretty much makes the group Kenny's babysitting squad, but I do still see him either trying to teach Clementine or Duck how to drive, resulting in him being paralyzed and sacrificing himself for the kids. Duck is obviously very hard-pressed to leave his father behind like this, which splits the decision from normal dialogue options and helping Kenny, down to just helping Duck try and move Kenny, or grabbing Duck by the arm and urging him to leave with you. If you pull Duck and try to convince him, he'll eventually relent and escape with Clementine and AJ, leaving Kenny to be devoured by the walkers. However, if you try to help him pull Kenny, it's not a positive result, as he can't easily shove both Duck and Clem away, so he's only able to shove Clem, resulting in Duck being bitten and dying with his father. This horror forces Clem to run away with AJ, never looking back. As for the first House ending, we know how Jane ends up, and I don't see her thinking the position was stable enough to bring a child into the world. This would then make Sarita and the others want to leave, as House has only been a source of hurt for them. Sarah would also be here if you kept her alive throughout Season 2, but it wouldn't last long, as they'd eventually come to blows with a large walker herd which separates them. Sarita and Sarah likely die during this, but they could still be out there somewhere. And lastly, in the ending where you convinced Kenny to stay with the rest of the group, you'd all be staying at House, with Jane still likely not making it from her canon death. But with the group being bigger, they choose to stay put at House until a group attacks their settlement, which is pretty much the same as the Wellington attack. To keep the kids safe, Kenny makes a sacrifice play, while Sarita escapes with the kids. Unfortunately, Sarita also perishes during this attack too, with Sarah dying if she's still here. Duck and Clementine barely escape with AJ in tow, and finally, all of our paths converge. Duck is with Clementine and 2 of them, but the rest see Clem alone with AJ. I'm gonna talk like Clementine is the only one here, but just imagine that in true Telltale fashion, Duck is also in the background for other versions. Clementine carries AJ as she runs through the woods, exactly the same as the canon version. She makes it inside only to hear the voice of a woman. The woman eventually gets inside, identifying herself as Ava. She has a small talk with Clementine as she did canonically, except that she mentions having a partner who she got split off from. She then offers Clementine to join her group, the New Frontier. Clem can accept or deny this request, but shortly after, they'll hear someone fighting outside, and Ava rushes out to see what's going on. She helps kill the walkers, which prompts Clementine to do so as well, and once the small herd is cleared, Ava hugs the mysterious person who was fighting them. Clem hears them rejoice about finding each other, and then sees who the person is. It's Carley. Carley and Clementine meet eyes for the first time in years, and proceed to hug as well. Duck might also have some added dialogue about how Carley saved him all that time ago. After this, Carley takes Clem and Duck back to her group with Ava, and they join the New Frontier. During their time there, I could easily see David taking on a father figure role to Duck, as he bears many similarities to Kenny. With Duck having lost his father so recently, he's happy to have someone fill those shoes, in a similar way to Kenny replacing Katja with Sarita. This leads to Duck being more loyal to the New Frontier, and understanding just how nice things are with them. As for Clementine, she'd be the closest with Carley due to their shared history, and Carley would be growing further from the New Frontier. She doesn't have that connection to David that Ava has, and their policies and methods have become more stringent over time, which doesn't fit well for Carley's personality. Some time passes and AJ gets sick, which forces Clementine to steal some vancomycin. She gets caught, resulting in David yelling at her. He says that Clem's time with the New Frontier is done, which Carley obviously doesn't like, and gets angry at David for being so harsh. This is her kid they're talking about. Letting him die when they have a chance to save him is wrong, even if it costs them some meds. David is taken aback and lashes out at Carley for her constant rebellious attitude and says that this is the last straw. He now knows where her loyalty lies, so she can go lie with them. Ava then cautiously reminds David of how long Carley's been with them, but Carley asks for Ava not to speak for her. She's done with this group anyway. Clementine tries to get AJ, but David refuses to give him up like he does in the game. They won't make it with him out there on their own, and if they really wanted him safe, they'd keep him with the big group who knows what they're doing. Clementine asks Duck if he's there, if he's even gonna say anything, but Duck just replies that he warned her it was a bad idea. And David's right. This is the best way to keep AJ safe. With this, Clem is given her last chance to say goodbye to AJ before her and Carley are forced to leave. Ava later brings a package for them with some supplies and a drawing from AJ. She says goodbye to Clementine and is especially sad when saying the same to Carley. Ava wishes the two luck and departs to leave the girls alone. After this, the two make something of a plan on how they are going to carry forward together. Sometime later, Clementine and Carley end up staying at Prescott for a while. Clem seems to always be ready to move, while Carley wants to settle down. She likes having a home, and she likes the people there. So Clementine goes out one night and ends up saving Javier from the New Frontier. Clem takes Javi back to Prescott, where they meet back up with Carley and Tripp. There, Carley is able to prevent Clementine from gunning down the jerk who ripped her off, and instead forces him to pay double what she gave him. He agrees, so nobody has to spend the night in a cell. Tripp offers to take Javi to find his family in the morning, with Eleanor offering to go tonight. Carley offers to help Javi no matter what time he goes, as she doesn't want him to lose his family. Things go the exact same from there, except that when they get attacked, Carley tries to get Clem to leave, but Clem refuses. Because of this, Carley will leave if Javi stays with Clementine, or she'll stay if Javi leaves. After the attack, Javi will talk to either Carley or Clem about their relationship with the other in order to understand them better. Not too long after everyone is regrouped at Prescott, it gets attacked by Badger and Max, causing its destruction. Luckily, everyone important escapes, with Carley included. Not much has changed here, except that Carley would probably step in to keep Gabe from shooting Conrad. She remembers a similar scenario from her past: the vehicle pulled over at night, an argument, a gun drawn, but she wants to prevent something like that from happening again to someone else. Gabe ultimately puts his gun away, and the gang continues on. Jesus joins their group and leads them through the subway tunnels, where Carley and Clementine reveal their former status of being part of the New Frontier. Conrad overhears that, taking Carley hostage and forcing Javi to turn her in when they get to Richmond. Carley tries to talk Conrad down calmly, but he just isn't giving, so she tells Javier to just go along with it. It still remains Javi's choice to shoot Conrad or not. If he does, Carley gets upset at him, as she was willing to be their bargaining chip. She knew the New Frontier people and doesn't think they'd kill her or anything. Seeing how Conrad reacted, Clem chooses to leave before they make it to Richmond, saying goodbye to Carley and the others. Carley would also tell Tripp what happened, defending Javi's actions despite disagreeing with them. This hurts their relationship a little, but it's better for them overall. In the version where you didn't kill Conrad, Clementine waits until the others make it up the ladder and stays behind to avoid going back to the New Frontier. Conrad explains the plan of using Carley to Tripp and the others, and they carry forward. After arriving at Richmond, David takes in Kate, with Gabe following him. The rest of the crew are then thrown into quarantine, with Carley asking Conrad how well this little scheme worked out for him. If he's alive, of course. From here, just about everything lines up with the canon events, with the group being kicked out of Richmond. Javi would have the choice of keeping Conrad's gun for himself, giving it to Carley, or giving it to Conrad if he's there. Obviously, giving it to Carley is fitting in both a getting even with Conrad's sense, and also because Carley's meant to be a great shot, which Javi probably saw in prior fights. Clementine returns to save Javi from some walkers, only if Carley didn't get Conrad's gun, as I imagine she could have taken them out herself with a gun. The group makes it to the place marked on the map, but since Carley is an added person, they're able to hold up the fences longer for Javier to find a way inside. However, having that extra person also makes it more likely for walkers to catch someone before they all make it. If Conrad got the gun, this helps them all make it inside safely, but if Javi took it, then Conrad dies. In addition, if Carley had the gun, she helped save Javi but expended most of her ammo. This makes the gun not very useful at this point, which means Conrad dies in that version as well. The rest of the crew make it inside, letting David in, with Carley and Clementine both being angry at him for letting AJ die. But luckily, David reveals that AJ is still alive and well, which tones down the drama. They find Badger, Max, and Lonnie, and battle them. Carley is able to help catch Lonnie, meaning Joan won't see them coming. They're able to sneak in and do all the same stuff as in canon, like recruiting Ava, only here we'd have another returning character. This is Duck, whom Ava sought help from in order to help his father figure, David. Of course, this is only if you kept Duck alive. I'm sure he probably would have been mentioned to Javier once or twice by Carly, Clementine, and David. With Duck there, he steps in to prevent Javi from being cut by the New Frontier guy, which makes Dave feel a little inadequate. This kid around his age, who was best friends with Clem, just saved his uncle, and not him. They carry on, getting info from Lingard, and confronting Joan. They now have Lonnie and potentially Max as proof, but Lonnie simply lies and pins everything on Javi and David. This is enough to get them locked up again, before Javier breaks out with the help of Kate or Gabe. They regroup with Duck and Clementine returning. There'd probably be some bitterness between the two, mainly from Clem, but Duck thinks it'll end up alright now that they're working together again. Obviously, this interaction doesn't happen if Duck isn't in your playthrough. From here, we have pretty much all the same events happening as they did in canon. Carly stays behind at the apartment, leading to her being caught by Joan and set as one of Javi's options at the lineup. Duck isn't present despite being captured, since it would obviously be bad for Joan to gun down a literal child in front of a crowd. But he is a useful pawn to keep David from acting out. Javier chooses to spare Carly, Ava, or Tripp, with Joan killing whoever it is you choose. But it's an act of mercy, since she only killed one person instead of two. Obviously, if you choose Carly, the what-if kind of ends there. Everything carries out the exact same going forward. But if you choose Ava or Tripp, well, it depends. If Tripp died, then Carly would be overwhelmed by the walkers in his place, and if Ava died, then I imagine the walker that jumped on Ava would take Carly instead. This then leads to Tripp being killed anyway, so no matter what, all three would realistically die in these three ways. But it is possible that Tripp still goes first, which prevents Carly from being attacked by the walker. This then leaves both Tripp and Carly on the other side of the herd, with no real way out. And I can't imagine Carly being resourceful enough to think of using the walker guts like most characters do in these what-ifs. I mean, she didn't even know when a radio didn't have batteries. And maybe Clem could think of it, but I doubt she'd have enough time to think of it, then relay this information to Carly, and then have Carly also perform the act. This would also be Carly's first time doing the trick, so it would be even more unlikely for it to happen. Now, there is the possibility of Javier letting Carly swing onto the helicopter before him, with Carly accepting the offer. But that means Javi is left to die instead. It's possible he could fight his way out, since he's one of the top tiers of the verse, but I feel like there's just too many walkers in too tight of an area for him to make it out. Not to mention the rebar everywhere, and the fall to his death. So one wrong move and he's pretty much done. So in this version, Carly would survive in Javier's place. Kate, Gabe, and David are all going to be extremely torn up about Javi's death, probably more than a 2-second sadness like they showed for Ava, but they're talked through it by Carly and Clementine. David eventually takes the reins back and says that they have to keep going, as it's what Javi wanted. From here, Carly or David replace Javier's role with the walker guts and get them in the garage. David then comes up with the decision to leave, which Kate refuses to do, while also bringing up Javi's death. They have an obligation to save these people. David disagrees and chooses to leave, with Gabe going with him. From here, Carly will go after Gabe and David as she feels like she owes it to Javi to keep his family safe. Clementine makes her decision based on the flashback choices, and from here, all the endings line up with the canon endings, just with Carly subbing in for Javi. So if Clem goes with Carly, David and Gabe survive. If not, David dies. No matter what, Kate dies unless Clementine went to Richmond. Well, she still dies then too, but not if you add Duck in your version of events. He'd show up to help Clem and Kate, apologizing for not meeting up with them sooner. He was held by some of Joan's people and barely escaped when the walkers attacked. Together, they take down all the walkers, with help from Jesus and his crew. After saving Richmond, Carly and Clem make the choice to go after AJ. Duck chooses to stay behind, as he's saddened over the death of David, or he's trying to help his surrogate father find his place again, now that his blood family has been torn apart. I'm not sure who would become the new leader of Richmond. Maybe it'd be left to whoever you have left. Gabe and Duck are obviously too young, but maybe if David is alive, he could take full leadership. It could also fall on Lingard if he's alive, maybe Kate, I don't know. All of these options feel kind of half-baked, as I don't think any of them would even want to lead anymore, with the one exception of David, though even then his image is probably burned a little due to the events that just took place, and also his personality. But I guess that kind of makes sense. Javier is dead, so the person most qualified isn't there anymore, leaving whoever you kept alive as duct tape for Richmond. This is sort of like the neutral endings in Undertale, if anybody has ever played that, where whoever is left will rule the underground. But at the end, Carly and Clementine leave Richmond in order to go find AJ at McCarroll Ranch. After leaving Richmond, Carly and Clementine would retrieve AJ from McCarroll Ranch, proceeding to stay on the road after this point. They make it through the station from the beginning of the episode, with everything playing out the exact same way. Carly would have some additional comments, but it's pretty tame in terms of changes. She is the only one to stay conscious after the car crash, as she is met by Marlon and Violet, who help save Clementine and AJ. They take her back to the school, where she meets everyone and gets reunited with Clem and AJ after they wake up. The kids obviously have some prejudice for Carley since she's an adult, but Marlon reserves his judgment for now. Carley works her way up in the first night, as she is decently charismatic. She ends up going to whatever spot you don't pick the morning after, either fishing or hunting. Carley would appreciate a Sim's level-headedness and say that he reminds her of someone she knew before. She would also make an effort to connect with Violet and Brody, though whether she'd be successful as Clementine is up for debate. By the end of the day, the group heads back to the station in order to make up for their recently stolen goods. Carley keeps watch while Clem and AJ go inside, only for a weird dude to follow them. Carley approaches with caution, seeing his gun. He talks to Clementine and AJ, threatening them to give him some of their supplies. During this, Carley is seen creeping behind the man with a weapon drawn. She looks to Clementine, with Clem either giving a signal or shaking her head slightly. If she shakes her head, Carley backs off reluctantly, and Clem likely gives up a bag of supplies, unless you're a maniac and shove Abel out of the window after telling Carley not to attack. As for Clementine giving the signal, Abel would notice and dodge quickly, getting his shoulder cut by Carley's blade. However, he knocks her to the ground, and then turns to aim his gun to Clementine before being knocked out of the window by her. The gang then leave in a hurry, reporting what happened to Marlon and Brody. Marlon appreciates the help, but Brody is freaked out. Later that night, Carley and Clementine awake to yelling in the pipes, with both going down to investigate. They find Marlon and Brody before Marlon kills Brody, making Carley extremely upset. Marlon tries to escape after seeing Brody die, but Carley and Clem trail him, quickly escaping after dealing with the zombified Brody. They dismantle Marlon's lies, with Carley especially wanting him to be brought to justice, but in a fair and just way. Unfortunately for her, AJ seems to have inherited Carley's trigger finger this time around, and he shoots Marlon. The next day, Carley tries to explain the problem with what AJ did, relating it to how she felt when Lily shot Doug. Marlon was flawed, but he had people who cared about him. Just because he did bad things doesn't mean he should be killed. Clementine can agree or disagree, but AJ will try and understand what his two parental figures are saying. The group still gets kicked out of the school and ends up running into Abel and Lily. The reunion between Lily and Carley takes center stage, which Lily makes even more tense by barely remembering Carley and Doug's names. Carley calls out Lily for being the same person she was before, and how she'll hurt anyone just to get what she wants. Lily doesn't like this telling of her story and snaps back to how she might have been wrong about Carley and Doug stealing from the group. But she was trying to protect them, just not in the right way. Now she's protecting her new community properly, which is why she's offering to let the past be and have Carley and Clementine and their friends join them. If these two have made it this far, they could be an asset to the Delta. Carley obviously refuses, and the three eventually escape from Lily, with Carley being shot by Abel. Luckily, they run into James, who patches her up and lets them stay the night with him. Carley gets in good with the group again, helping to teach them how to aim better. Lily and their squad attack the school, with Carley being there to help fight off the raiders. Due to her role as Deadeye in Season 1, I think she'd be able to help cut down Lily's forces a decent bit. She likely even squares off with Lily herself for a brief struggle before or after Clementine does. This also means that whoever Clem doesn't save between Lewis and Violet would be saved by Carley's impeccable aim. Lily leaves, but Abel is still at the school to be interrogated, which they do, finding out about the Delta ship that the squad resides in. The plan with recruiting James and his walkers goes the same as it did in canon, with Carley thanking him for his help, since he did save her life. At the party, Carley would relate to them how she knows she hasn't really been the most well received, but she wants to keep everyone safe. The leader of the group that's attacking them took someone she loved a long time ago, and Carley doesn't want to feel that pain again for anyone. They go on to attack the Delta ship and free their friends, only to be stopped by Minerva. Lily proceeds to have a talk with Carley and Clem, with Minnie admitting that she killed Sophie. This would be incredibly upsetting to Carley, who hates the thought of another person losing their loved ones to Lily. First Doug, then Marlon, then Mitch, and now Sophie too. Lily suggests Carley bite her tongue, or she might just lose it. Carley doesn't relent though, and tells Lily off in a very similar manner to how she did in Season 1. Lily sighs, saying that she didn't want to have to do this, before telling Minerva to hold Carley down. Clementine motions to stop her, but Lily also sets Dorian to aim at Clementine. And so, as Carley is pinned down, Lily pulls out her knife and relieves Carley of her tongue. AJ threatens to kill Lily, which piques her interest. She then leaves with AJ, which allows Clementine to break free and beat up Minerva. Dorian is shot by Lewis or Violet, letting Clem ascend to face Lily. Lewis and Violet then stay behind to make sure Carley is okay. Clementine fights Lily, pretty much the same way as she did canonically, resulting in AJ getting the gun and Clem choosing to let him kill Lily or not. The results end up the same as in the original, and the group leaves as the ship explodes. They reunite nearby, but Carley is taken back with the others, as her wound is a bit too recent to have her take on anything too big. Clementine faces off against Minerva on the bridge, getting her leg cut open before being bitten in the same spot. AJ and her go to James's barn, where they make a final stand, before AJ cuts off her leg and takes her back to the school. Sadly, Carley can no longer speak, but at least she's alive with the rest of the group. She finally gets her somewhat happy ending, although it is very bittersweet. And despite its brevity, that ends What If Carley and Doug Survived. I know this part is short, but if you've been on this channel, you've seen so many What If X survived, and then just having an extra character in Season 4. So realistically, I really shouldn't have to go over all of the events in crucial detail, especially with Carley, who doesn't really make too much of a difference. So having her get her tongue cut out by Lily is a perfect callback to Season 1, and also just adds some stakes and some bittersweet nature to the ending of the story. But anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed, and if you did, please consider becoming a channel member for only $2.99 a month, like these people here. Ellie to Plug 2, Wax and Parrotfish, Paul Keen, Hazy Brush, Marco DeCinco, Sam Malum, Davisville 84, Willie, Very Classy Demon, 23 Days Later, River Lamphere, Anarchist Dubs, Aiden Kearns, Yeah, Zombie Warlord, and Mark Smokey. If you want to have your name read out at the end of the video like these people, as well as getting exclusive access to priority comment replies, community posts, and also early access to videos, please feel free to become a member for $2.99 a month. But as always, tell me if you like this part, tell me what you think will happen next. Oh no, nope. But as always, tell me if you like this series, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.